A young nurse rescued two drowning twin girls from a river, unaware their father was a lonely billionaire searching for real love. The morning was cold and quiet when Emily stepped off her shift. Rain had fallen hard in the early hours, leaving the ground wet and the air thick with the clean scent of damp earth and wildflowers. She didn't crave much, just rest, a good book and the occasional stillness the forest offered. But what she didn't know was that morning would change her life forever. The countryside river ran fast after the storm, swollen and deceptively calm. It was the kind of current that hid its power beneath a glassy surface. She was nearing the old wooden footbridge when something pierced the stillness. A faint, frantic cry. Emily froze. Then came another, sharper, more urgent. She ripped the earbuds out of her ears and looked around. Her instincts as a nurse kicked in immediately, adrenaline sharpening every sound. This wasn't just a bird or an echo. It was a scream, small, desperate. A child. She broke into a sprint, her boots thudding against the wet soil as she veered off the path and into the trees, heart pounding against her ribs. Bursting through the last row of brush, her eyes locked on the source. Two little girls, twins, clinging to a splintered branch jutting from the riverbank. Their matching pink raincoats clung to their soaked bodies as the current yanked at them violently. One of them screamed again, her tiny hands slipping. Emily didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She threw off her jacket, kicked off her shoes and dove headfirst into the river. The cold was like 1,000 knives. It knocked the air from her lungs and the strength from her arms, but she swam anyway, her body running on instinct, cutting through the torrent. First, she reached the girl closest to the branch, just as her fingers let go. Emily wrapped an arm around her waist and kicked hard to stay afloat. The child sobbed against her shoulder. Emily whispered steady reassurances through chattering teeth. The second girl was slipping too. The branch cracked under her weight. With a burst of strength, Emily pushed forward, grabbed the child's arm, and pulled her free just as the branch snapped and disappeared downstream. Kicking hard, she swam toward the shore, her muscles screaming. Every stroke felt slower, heavier. The river fought her, but she didn't let go. Finally, her feet touched the muddy edge. She dragged both girls onto the riverbank and collapsed beside them, chest heaving, trembling with exhaustion. The girls were coughing, crying, but they were alive. That's when she heard him. A voice shouting. A man burst through the undergrowth, mud streaking his pants, his coat half-buttoned. Panic carved deep lines across his handsome, disheveled face. When he saw the girls, his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees beside them and scooped them into his arms. "Oh God," he choked. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" One of the girls threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his coat. The other reached for her sister. He held them both tightly like he'd nearly lost his soul. "I only turned away for a minute," he said breathlessly to Emily. "They were playing near the edge while I took a work call. I should never have looked away." His voice cracked on the last word. Emily sat up, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her cheeks, her breath still catching in her throat. She gave him a small, tired smile. "They're okay now," she said gently. "That's what matters." Their eyes met for the first time. He didn't speak, just stared, his gaze filled with more than gratitude. Or maybe something deeper. He thought nothing of it. Just a thankful father. Another day, another emergency. But Nathan Carter would never forget her face. That evening he sat alone in his study, not looking at her directly, of course. Just the memory of her, etched in his mind like a watermark he couldn't erase. He was a man most people only knew through whispers. Nathan Carter, billionaire recluse, single father, CEO of a quiet tech empire. Since losing his wife 3 years ago, he had withdrawn from the spotlight completely, focusing on raising his daughters and building a safe, controlled world around them. But that morning, on the one day he let his guard down, a stranger had saved his world. He had withdrawn from the world 3 years ago after losing his wife, building a life of security around his daughters, one filled with cameras, bodyguards, and private tutors. But that morning, on the one day he let his guard down, everything nearly fell apart. A stranger, a nurse, had saved his entire world. He remembered her, soaked, kneeling in the mud, not asking for praise, not even staying long enough to be thanked. Once the girls were safe, she had walked away, her clothes dripping, her voice gentle. He hadn't even caught her full name. Just Emily. That night Nathan couldn't sleep. The girls had nightmares. He stayed up, holding them, whispering promises of safety while his mind returned to the image of the woman who had pulled them from the edge of death with her bare hands. For years, Nathan Carter had convinced himself that love was a chapter he'd closed for good. But something about Emily stirred the dust. She had been fearless, not because she needed to be seen as a hero, but because she simply couldn't stand by and do nothing. That kind of courage didn't come from ego. It came from heart. He made a quiet decision. He would find her, not to offer her money, not to make a media statement. He wanted to find her because something inside him had shifted. Something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Emily hadn't expected to see him again. That river rescue to her was just another moment of quiet sacrifice. Something nurses did without expecting gratitude. It was part of her world. A world where you gave because it was right, not because someone was watching. The morning sun poured over the quiet town like honey, casting sleepy shadows across the narrow streets. At the edge of town, nestled beside a field of wildflowers, the local clinic stirred to life. Inside, Emily moved calmly between exam rooms and the front desk. She had been working since dawn. Fatigue clung to her bones, but she didn't mind. The clinic felt like home, a place where she could give something real. Her shift was nearly over. The last patient had left, and she was wrapping up her notes when she heard the unmistakable sound of an expensive engine purring just outside. It was low, smooth, and completely out of place in the gravel parking lot. Through the wide front window she saw it, a sleek black SUV gleaming under the afternoon sun. The tinted windows gave nothing away. Emily froze, her pen hovering in midair. The door opened and there he was. Nathan Carter. He stepped out slowly, dressed in a dark overcoat that fit too perfectly to be casual. But it wasn't the coat that caught her attention. It was the way he held his daughter's hands, one on each side, like they were his tether to the world. Emily stood up instinctively as the trio approached. Her heart picked up speed, not with fear but with something softer. A quiet ripple of anticipation she couldn't explain. "Hi," Nathan said, his voice low and gentle. Before she could respond, the twins ran forward, their tiny shoes squeaking against the linoleum. They wrapped their arms around her, giggling, full of joy. "You saved us," one of them chirped. "You're like a hero," the other added, her eyes wide with wonder. Emily laughed softly, crouching to their level. "I think you two were pretty brave yourselves." They held her longer than she expected, warm, familiar, like she already belonged in their lives. When they finally stepped back, Nathan came forward and held out a small envelope. His expression wasn't bold or expectant, just present. "It's from them," he said almost apologetically. Emily took the card. It was handmade, pink construction paper folded unevenly, covered in crayon drawings. Inside were scribbled words from two little girls who didn't quite know how to say, "Thank you." But somehow, through their lopsided rainbows and hearts, the message came through. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "They're sweet," she said. "They are," Nathan replied, watching the twins as they twirled around one another. "They haven't stopped talking about you since that day." Emily didn't know what to say. Most people thanked her and forgot her name by the end of the week. She looked at him. "I'm just glad they're okay." "You saved them," he said softly. "There's no other way to put it." She looked down, a little embarrassed. "It's what anyone would have done." "No," he said, his voice quiet. "It's not." There was no boast, no romantic gesture. Just quiet gratitude. And something else in his eyes. Something searching. Something real. Emily didn't quite know how to respond. She wasn't used to being remembered. Most people thanked her, smiled politely, and forgot her name by the end of the week. She glanced back at Nathan. "I'm just glad they're okay." "You saved them," he said again gently. "There's no other way to put it." She looked down, embarrassed. "It's what anyone would have done." "No," he said quietly but firmly. "It's not." There was no bravado in his voice, No flirtation or theatrics. Just a deep, genuine gratitude. And something else. Something in his eyes that didn't align with the tailored coat, the luxury car, or the billionaire legacy that followed him like a shadow. It was vulnerability. It was searching. Emily nodded slowly and slipped the pink card into her coat pocket. I thought I'd say thank you in person, Nathan said, sensing her modesty. I didn't want it to be transactional. Her eyes flicked toward him. You mean, no check in the mail? He smiled, and it was softer than she'd expected. No check. Just this. Emily tilted her head. That's rare. I don't do things like this, he admitted. But then again, not many people dive into a river for two kids they've never met. There was a pause. He seemed like he might say more but didn't. Instead, he looked at her for a lingering moment. The kind of look that left her breath catching, like standing at the edge of something high, something thrilling. Then he turned. Come on, girls, he called. The twins obediently took his hands again. As they reached the SUV, one of them turned and waved. Emily waved back, her heart still unsteady from the rhythm he'd left behind. Then they were gone. That night she sat in her small kitchen. The soft hum of the kettle filled the space with warmth. Her apartment was modest but cozy. A bookshelf lined with worn paperbacks, and a ceramic angel her late mother had gifted her years ago. She pulled the pink card from her coat pocket, opened it again and smiled at the lopsided hearts and rainbows. But her thoughts weren't on the drawing. They were on the man, Nathan Carter. She'd heard his name whispered a few times in the staff break room. Billionaire. Widower. Tech mogul turned recluse. No one really knew what he did or why he disappeared from the spotlight. But now she had seen him up close. He wasn't what she imagined. There was sadness in him, but also strength. Not the kind that came from corporate power or boardrooms. The kind built from loss, love, and trying to hold it all together. She thought of the way he looked at her. The way he hadn't tried to impress her. He showed up only to say thank you. Not to offer gifts. Not to turn her into some headline. It was simple. And it lingered. Days passed. Then a week. She didn't expect to see him again. But he returned. It was a quiet Friday morning. Emily stepped out of the clinic for a short walk before her shift, and there he was, standing across the street with 2 coffee cups in hand. He looked almost shy. I wasn't sure how you'd take it, he said, lifting one of the cups. Emily raised an eyebrow, amused. Do you stock all your heroes with cappuccinos? Only the ones who pull my children out of rivers, he replied. She smiled. Couldn't help it. Lucky for me then. They sat on the bench outside the flower shop and talked. Nothing deep at first, just work, the weather, the chaos patients sometimes bring in. But the conversation didn't stall. It moved easily like a current they both recognized. He told her he worked remotely now, having stepped away from his company after his wife died. He'd chosen to raise his daughters away from the noise of the world. They're my anchor, he said. But some days I forget how to be anything more than a father. Emily nodded. You're allowed to be more than one thing. What about you? He asked. I'm a nurse, she said. Daughter of a woman who worked 3 jobs. Lover of quiet walks. Avoider of drama. He chuckled. Sounds like you're good at staying grounded. She looked at him, something quiet in her gaze. It's safer that way. And he understood. He didn't push. Over the next few weeks, Nathan found reasons to visit. Sometimes with the girls, sometimes just passing by. And Emily, who had spent years carefully building a life free from chaos and complication, found herself waiting for the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Waiting for the low, familiar hum of his voice when he greeted her. They weren't dating. Not officially. There were no declarations, no flirtations, just 2 people skimming the edge of something they hadn't named yet. But the moments mattered. Like the time he brought her a book she'd once mentioned in passing. Or the evening he sat with her outside the clinic during a blackout, watching the stars bloom across the sky. She learned that he liked his coffee black. No sugar. He learned she always hummed when she read. One afternoon the girls raced ahead of him and threw their arms around Emily. Are you going to be our friend forever? One of them asked, eyes wide. Emily blinked, surprised. Before she could answer, Nathan stepped up behind them, his eyes warm. "We hope so," he said. Emily looked at him, caught between two instincts. One that told her to run from anything too good and another that begged her to stay. It scared her. But she stayed. That night, Emily stood by the river where it had all begun. The current had slowed. The sky above was streaked with gold and soft blue, and for the first time in a long time she didn't feel alone. She didn't know what Nathan would become to her, not 5 months from now or 5 years. She didn't know if he'd become her future or remain just a page in her story. But she knew this. Sometimes the river didn't just carry danger. Sometimes it carried you to something new. Rain came in heavy sheets, thick silvery ropes that blurred the world into watercolor. By mid-afternoon, the sky turned the color of smoke and thunder rolled across the hills. Inside the clinic, the lights flickered, threatened by the storm but holding steady. Emily stood beneath the narrow awning out front, arms crossed, scrubs damp around the edges. Her shift had ended 15 minutes ago, but the storm had arrived fast and fierce, leaving her stranded without an umbrella. She didn't mind the rain. In fact, she usually loved it. Just not when it was this angry. Her backpack hung loosely from one shoulder. Raindrops hit the pavement in loud splashes, bouncing like skipping stones. Across the street, wind shoved a newspaper into the gutter. Trees bowed and hissed. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Then a hum broke through the storm, the low, smooth purr of a well-tuned engine. She opened her eyes. A familiar black SUV pulled up in front of the clinic, its windows fogged at the corners. The wipers ticked rhythmically like a heartbeat. The driver's door opened. Nathan stepped out quickly and circled the vehicle. He opened the back door, reached inside, and emerged with 2 coffee cups nestled in a cardboard tray. He moved with purpose, shielding them from the rain as best he could. By the time he reached her, his coat was already peppered with raindrops. "I was nearby," he offered like he needed to explain. Emily arched a brow. "In this weather?" He handed her a coffee with a quiet, hopeful smile. "Thought maybe you'd still be here. Worst case, I drink both." She accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his. "Best case. We drink them together." Emily hesitated for just a moment, then gestured to the small bench beneath the overhang. They sat in silence at first, each sipping carefully, warming their hands around the cups. Rain drummed a soft rhythm around them, painting the world in gentle grays. She glanced at him. He wasn't the man she first imagined, the elusive billionaire people gossiped about. Sitting beside her now, Nathan looked like any other tired parent. His suit jacket was rumpled. His hair damp at the edges. Shadows lined his eyes. But there was steadiness in his gaze. A quiet honesty that made her feel like she didn't have to be anyone but herself. "I don't really do this," he said after a while. She looked at him. "Coffee?" He smiled faintly. "No. Sitting in the rain with a woman I barely know, talking." "You could have sent another thank you card," she teased. "I thought about it," he said. "But I wanted to see you again." Emily stared down at the ripples in her coffee. Her voice was soft. "I'm not used to being seen." Nathan turned toward her. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I've been a nurse for 6 years. I'm good at it. But people don't remember the person under the uniform. They remember the prescription you gave them or the way you cleaned a wound. Not your name. Not your face." "I remembered your name," he said. She glanced at him. "Because I pulled your daughters from a river." "Maybe," Nathan replied, his tone gentler now. "But maybe also because you didn't ask for anything afterward." Emily tilted her head. "Was I supposed to?" He smiled. "Most people would have." They sat in silence, letting the quiet settle between them. Thunder cracked in the distance. The rain softened, shifting from a downpour to a gentle drizzle. Emily pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "My mom taught me to swim, you know," she said. Nathan looked over at her. "She said it was one of those things every woman should know. How to cook rice, how to patch a tire, and how to swim, in case the world tries to drown you." "Smart woman," he said. She was. Emily's smile faded, touched by nostalgia. She worked nights at a diner. In the summer we'd go to the lake on her one day off. She taught me to float first. Said surviving is just learning to keep your head above water, even if the current is strong. Nathan's eyes softened. You talk about her like she's still here. She is, Emily replied, touching her chest. Just not physically. He nodded, understanding written in the quiet crease of his brow. I stay up most nights, Nathan said, his voice low. Not working. Just watching the girls sleep. She looked at him. His vulnerability struck her unexpectedly. I keep wondering if I'm doing it right, he continued. If I'm being too protective or not enough. If I'm giving them a good life, or just a safe one. You love them, Emily said simply. That's the most important part. Nathan took a slow breath, letting it sit in his chest for a moment. When their mother died, he said, I told myself I'd build them a world where nothing could touch them. But the truth is, no amount of money, no amount of planning, can prepare you for how fragile it all is. Emily nodded slowly. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. The rain had mostly stopped now. Just a soft tapping on the awning overhead. The scent of wet earth filled the air, clean, green, and alive. Nathan looked at her again. Not in the way some men do. Not in the way that asks or assumes. But in the way someone looks when they realize they found something rare. Someone who listens. Someone who sees. Emily stood, brushing a few drops from her coat. Thank you for the coffee. Nathan rose with her, the second cup still warm in his hand. I could pretend it was just about the coffee, he said, but it wasn't. She didn't answer. He didn't need to. She took a few steps toward the sidewalk, then paused. You're doing better than you think, she said, not turning around. His voice caught slightly. How do you know? She looked over her shoulder, a small smile playing at her lips. Because they still run toward you. Not away. And with that she walked off into the soft mist left behind by the fading storm. Nathan stood there for a long while after she was gone. The coffee in his hand grew cold. But in his chest something stirred. It wasn't longing. Not exactly. It was hope. Hope that in a world which had already taken so much from both of them, something unexpected might still be given. Something real. Emily's words echoed in Nathan's mind long after she disappeared into the fading mist. Because they still run toward you, not away. He stood there for a while, coffee cooling in his hand, heart flickering with something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't longing. Not exactly. It was hope. Hope that in a world which had taken so much from both of them, something unexpected could still be given. Something real. The days grew longer, washed in the golden light of late spring. The rain that once drenched the hills gave way to warmth and wildflowers. In the quiet town between rivers and woods, weeks slipped by like the pages of a well-loved book, gentle, almost unnoticed. But something had shifted. Emily didn't measure it in dates or milestones. She felt it in the rhythm of her days. It started with small things. Nathan and the girls showing up at the clinic with a thermos of homemade soup and shy smiles. She was at her desk, head buried in paperwork, when the door creaked open. Two small voices called her name. She looked up to see the twins bundled in rain jackets, proudly holding out the steaming container. Nathan stood behind them, looking sheepish, their backpacks slung over his shoulders. We thought you might have skipped lunch again, he said. Emily smiled, something warming inside her in a way she didn't fully understand. She sat with the girls on the clinic porch, sharing soup and stories while Nathan leaned quietly against a post nearby, listening. It wasn't grand. And that's why it meant more. Over time the visits grew more frequent. An invitation to a picnic behind Nathan's estate. He packed sandwiches and lemonade. The girls brought a basket of wildflowers. Emily arrived barefoot, hair braided, her dress catching the breeze. She taught the twins how to weave flower crowns and laughed as they clumsily mimicked her hands. Nathan watched from a distance at first, coffee in hand, smile soft. Eventually he joined them. The girls tucked crooked daisies into his hair, giggling like birds. Another day he showed up at her cottage with a toolkit in hand. You mentioned your railing was loose, he said, standing on her porch in jeans and a faded t-shirt. You remembered that? I remember everything you say. She let him in. They worked side by side. The repair was simple, but they lingered afterward, drinking iced tea on the porch. They didn't talk about money or the past. They just talked. Emily shared memories of her childhood, learning to patch walls and chase leaks with duct tape and determination. Nathan told her about the early days of his company, rented garages, sleepless nights, deals that nearly broke him. But he never bragged. Not once. He spoke like a man who had seen the top and still missed the bottom. And Emily listened, not because of who he was but because of how he spoke. He wasn't a billionaire in those moments. He was a man trying not to be alone. A man wondering what kind of life might still be waiting for him. Their connection deepened in the silence between words. In the small glances when the girls danced barefoot through sprinklers. In the quiet smiles exchanged across a kitchen table while folding tiny socks and peeling apples. Nathan started to laugh more. His shoulders relaxed. The tired lines at the corners of his eyes softened, not with weariness but with warmth. One evening they all gathered in his backyard. A small fire crackled beneath the sunset. The girls roasted marshmallows, their cheeks pink and sticky. Emily sat between them on a wide blanket, her fingers gently brushing tangles from their hair. Nathan watched from his chair a few feet away, drink in hand, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The scene in front of him was enough. Emily glowing in firelight, his daughters curled into her sides like they'd always belonged there. The laughter faded into yawns. The girls dozed off, one in Emily's lap, the other resting against her shoulder. Emily didn't move. She looked up at Nathan, her eyes soft and uncertain. And he felt it, that invisible thread between them growing taut with meaning. He didn't speak, but something in the air changed. It wasn't about gratitude anymore. Or fate. It was real. Something forged not in a moment of crisis, but in the quiet hours that followed. He stood, crossed the space between them and gently draped a blanket around her shoulders. She looked up, breath-catching, not from what he did but how he did it. With care. With gentleness. With reverence. She hadn't felt that in years. He didn't need to say a word. The scene before him was enough. Emily glowing in the firelight, his daughters curled into her sides like they had always belonged there. The laughter faded into yawns and eventually both girls drifted off. One asleep in Emily's lap, the other resting her head on her shoulder. Emily didn't move. She just looked up at Nathan, her eyes wide and unsure, soft with something she hadn't let herself feel in years. And Nathan felt it too. That invisible thread between them had grown taut with meaning. This wasn't about gratitude anymore. It wasn't about fate or timing or debt. It was real. Something born not from a crisis, but from the quiet hours that followed. Something made of shared vulnerability, offered freely and received with care. He stood slowly, crossed to where she sat, and draped a blanket gently around her shoulders. She looked up, a breath catching in her throat, not because of what he did but how he did it. With care. With reverence. With a gentleness she thought the world had forgotten. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across their faces. The girls shifted slightly, nestling deeper into Emily's warmth. "I don't remember the last time I saw them sleep like that," Nathan whispered. Emily looked down at them, her voice barely audible. "They feel safe. Because of you," he said. She shook her head. "Because of us." He stayed by her side a while longer. Not touching her. Not asking anything. Just letting the moment settle around them like soft ash from the fire. And that's when Emily knew. This was no longer about a river. Or a rescue. It wasn't about fate or obligation. It was something that had bloomed slowly, like wildflowers growing through cracks in stone. Something that asked for no permission, no explanation. A connection, honest, unpolished, deeply real. And somewhere inside her, something stirred. Hope. But with that hope came fear. The mornings grew colder. The days shorter. And Emily began to feel a heaviness in her chest, something she couldn't shake. She had let herself drift closer and closer to Nathan and the girls, their world slowly wrapping itself around her. But deep down she feared it wasn't hers to keep. It wasn't just about Nathan, it was everything that came with him. The wealth. The mansion. the expectations. A life she hadn't been raised to navigate. One quiet afternoon, as leaves swirled outside her small cottage window, she found the words she had been dreading to speak. "I need space," she told Nathan over the phone. "I can't keep doing this." Her voice trembled, but she was resolute. Silence fell on the other end of the line. Thick, heavy. She pictured his face, imagined the way it must have fallen when she said it. The thought made her chest ache even more. But she pushed through it. "It's the only way," she whispered. "You're not saying goodbye, are you?" Nathan's voice cracked. "I don't know," Emily said. I need to think. I don't belong in that life. With you, with your world." "I won't argue," he said quietly. "Take all the space you need. I'll be here if you want to talk." And just like that, the connection between them, once so sure, began to loosen, slipping like sand between her fingers. The next few days were empty hours. At the clinic, Emily went through the motions, blood pressure readings, shots, comforting worried parents, but something inside her felt hollow. She missed him. She missed the girls, their laughter, their light. But she couldn't admit it. Meanwhile, in Nathan's world, silence grew louder. The house that once felt warm now echoed with absence. Laughter no longer filled the rooms. And the memory of Emily clung to every corner. He hadn't called. He'd respected her wishes. But it tore at him. Then one evening, a small crumpled piece of paper caught his eye, a drawing one of the girls had left on the coffee table. It showed all of them, Nathan, the twins, and Emily. She wasn't drawn as a nurse. Not a visitor. She was part of their family. The realization hit him like a wave. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. If real love was what he wanted, he had to fight for it. Not with grand gestures, but with truth. And the courage to hold on to what had been quietly growing between them all along.